Close your eyes and imagine drifting through the quiet vastness of space. No sound, no wind, only the soft hum of eternity, wrapping around you like a blanket of stars. Far below, a small red world spins in silence. Cold, ancient, yet strangely familiar. They say it was once alive, that rivers once sang across its valleys and winds whispered over its blue lakes. Tonight, we will travel there together, not in rockets, but in dreams. So breathe slowly, let go of the day, and listen. As we begin the story of life on Mars, there is a kind of stillness that only arrives before great discoveries, a pause, as if the universe itself is holding its breath. That was the feeling on Earth the morning NASA's announcement broke across every screen, every radio, every quiet conversation over breakfast. They had found something small, something that might change everything humanity had ever known about life, death, and the vast, empty silence between the stars. In the glass halls of NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, the early sun slipped through narrow blinds, painting golden stripes across desks crowded with monitors. The scientists gathered in hushed excitement, hearts beating faster than their words could form. A few dared to smile. Others kept their faces composed, knowing how easily hope could become embarrassment in the cold world of science. On the screens, flickered images sent back from more than 200 million kilometers away, the Jezero crater on Mars. There, a single rover named Perseverance had been wandering through ancient riverbeds, kicking up the dust of forgotten centuries. It was built to listen for whispers in the rock, the faint, stubborn echo of life that might have once been. Outside, the world reacted with awe. News anchors called it the discovery of the century. Children pointed at the red planet through their telescopes, dreaming of alien microbes and future explorers. And yet amid the noise there was something deeply human. A quiet longing to know that we were not alone, that somewhere out there another spark had once flickered in the dark. You could almost imagine the planet watching us back, the way a sleeping giant might stir when its name is spoken. For billions of years, Mars had been nothing more than a shimmering dot in the sky, a mystery, a mirror to our curiosity. Now that mirror reflected something new, our desire not just to explore, but to connect. The narrator of this moment, a scientist, a dreamer, perhaps even you could feel the weight of it. After all, the search for life beyond Earth has never been just about science. It is about longing. It is about the deep human ache to find company in the endless night. Every telescope, every probe, every rover we send is a message written in dust and metal. Is anyone else out there? NASA called a press conference. Cameras rolled. The spokesperson spoke calmly, measuredly about possible biosignatures and organic compounds. The words were clinical, but beneath them hummed the heartbeat of wonder. For decades, humanity had stared into space, asking questions. For the first time in generations, the cosmos seemed to whisper back. But even as the headlines spread, caution lingered in every sentence. Scientists had been wrong before. The story of Mars was full of false dawns, moments of hope that vanished under the weight of new data. Still, there was something about this time that felt different. The evidence, they said, was subtle yet persistent, like a melody heard faintly through static. And so Earth waited. That night, across cities and fields, people lifted their eyes to the same small red dot that had watched over us since the dawn of time. Couples on balconies, children wrapped in blankets, astronomers peering through foggy lenses, all of them united by a single thought. What if? What if we are not the first to dream? What if the story of life did not begin here? What if somewhere long ago Mars took its first breath and we are only now hearing its final sigh? The thought was enough to make even skeptics pause, because whether it was true or not, it reminded humanity of something vital, that we are part of something larger than ourselves. That curiosity is not just a scientific instinct, but a spiritual one, a pulse that drives civilizations forward even when the stars remain silent. And so the story begins not with certainty, but with wonder. A quiet morning on Earth, a whisper from the red sands of Mars, and the fragile belief that maybe, just maybe, the universe has been waiting for us to listen. If you're still awake, floating gently among these thoughts, I invite you to stay close. There are many more mysteries waiting in the dust of other worlds. So before you drift into dreams, remember to subscribe to Gentle Sleep Stories, where every night the universe will sing you another story to sleep. As the world fell asleep that night under a shared sky, the news of life on Mars still echoed softly in the background of human thought. The hum of possibility lingered like a melody that refused to fade. And far away in a world painted in red and silence, a small machine named Perseverance continued its slow, patient journey. While Earth dreamed, Percy moved, carrying with it the hopes of billions rolling across an ancient land that once held water, wind, and perhaps the memory of breath. There is something almost tender in the way a machine explores. It does not rush or tire. It simply observes. Every movement of Perseverance, or Percy, is deliberate, like a pilgrim placing one careful foot after another on holy ground. It is easy to forget that this six-wheeled wanderer is more than metal and code. It is, in a quiet way, the outstretched hand of humankind reaching across the void. Jezero Crater, where Percy landed, is not merely a crater. It is the remnant of an ancient lake, one that shimmered under a warmer sun billions of years ago. Scientists say rivers once flowed into it, carving deltas, and leaving behind layers of clay and silt, the very fingerprints of water, the cradle of life. Even now, the terrain carries that ghostly memory, winding channels frozen in time, ridges like veins beneath a pale red skin. When Percy touched down in February of 2021, it was as though humanity itself had knelt beside that long, dry shore. Dust rose in a slow-motion bloom around its wheels, scattering into the thin Martian air, a quiet applause from a planet that had waited so long to be visited again. Each sunrise since then has been a private ceremony. The sun climbs weakly through the hazy atmosphere, staining the rocks a deep amber. The temperature barely rises above freezing, yet the light has a kind of sacred calm. Percy wakes, extends its robotic arm, and begins its work, examining, sampling, remembering. For the scientists on Earth, every image that arrives feels like a message in a bottle from another time. Each photograph reveals something intimate, a texture of mudstone, a whisper of mineral veins, the gentle slope of a once living delta. They know what these things mean. Clay formed only in the presence of water. Iron and phosphorus elements woven into the chemistry of life. To see them here is to glimpse a mirror of Earth's own beginning, long before any creature drew breath. At Mission Control, people speak to the rover as if it were alive. "Good morning, Percy," they say when new data comes in. "Sleep well." It may sound silly, but in that affection lies something deeply human, the need to make companionship out of loneliness. Percy is alone in a world where no human voice can truly reach, but still they talk to it. Still they listen. And the rover, in its way, answers not with words, but with beauty. It sends back landscapes that look both alien and heartbreakingly familiar. Dunes shaped by winds older than civilization, pebbles smoothed by ancient streams, hills that glow faintly under the low sun, as if holding some secret. Each image is like a page in a story written by time, a story the scientists are trying to read before the ink disappears completely. Then came the day when Percy stopped near the edge of what was once the Neretva-Vallis River channel. There the terrain changed, the soil darker, the rocks softer, shaped by what must have been the flow of water ages ago. The rover's instruments, Pixel and Sherlock, as the engineers fondly called them, began scanning a strange outcrop named the Bright Angel Formation. In those faint layers of clay and silt, Percy's eyes caught something remarkable. Tiny spots, barely visible, no larger than a grain of sand. They shimmered under the Martian light, almost like freckles on the face of a sleeping world. The scientists called them leopard spots, and in that simple name, wonder bloomed again. But Percy didn't know the excitement it had caused back on Earth. It simply kept working quietly, steadily under the endless red sky. Its wheels pressed into dust that hadn't been disturbed for eons. Above it, a cold wind swept across the crater, carrying with it the silence of deep time. You might imagine standing there beside that patient rover, staring out over the cracked basin where a lake once lay. You would see no movement, no birds, no clouds. Yet somehow you would feel a presence. The kind that lingers in ruins and fossils in places that once held something precious. Mars in that moment feels less like a dead planet, and more like a memory that refuses to fade. Back on Earth, the data arrived in waves, mineral compositions, light spectra, chemical maps. To most people, they were just numbers. But to the ones who had dedicated their lives to this mission, they were music. A new rhythm, faint and distant, but enough to stir hope once more. They gathered around the monitors in silence. Some whispered prayers, others smiled through tears. Because whether or not those tiny spots turned out to be signs of ancient life, they were something more than science could measure. They were proof that the human heart still looks upward, still listens, still believes. And that is the quiet beauty of exploration. It isn't about conquering or claiming. It's about wonder, the gentle kind that asks, not demands. Percy, small and alone under an alien sun, carries that wonder like a lantern through the dark. As night falls on Mars, its sensors power down. The temperature drops until frost begins to gather on the edges of its metal body. The sky deepens into purple and black. Above Earth glimmers faintly a blue star among countless others. Perhaps if machines could dream, Percy would dream of that blue dot, and of the voices that whisper to it across the void. We see you. Keep going. So if you're still awake, and your mind is wandering with the rover across the red horizon, take a breath and smile. The universe is vast, but stories like this remind us that we are connected by curiosity, by longing, by love for what lies beyond. And if you'd like to drift through more journeys like this one, where science meets serenity and discovery, hums like a lullaby. Remember to subscribe to Gentle Sleep Stories, where the stars never stop telling us their secrets. And so, while the world slept under the gentle hum of its own atmosphere, Perseverance kept moving through the Martian silence. Days passed, like sighs one into another. The rover's wheels traced delicate lines across the dust, like calligraphy on an ancient scroll. Then, one morning, as sunlight spilled faintly across the red plains, something caught Percy's eye. A glimmer, a set of tiny markings on stone, as if the planet itself had left behind a secret for us to find. The moment came quietly, almost shyly, the way great discoveries often do. There was no sudden burst of light, no dramatic music, just a faint reflection off the surface of a small rock nestled among hundreds of others. Yet in that subtle gleam, the eyes of an entire species turned toward Mars once more. Percy's camera tilted slightly, focusing on the formation. To anyone else, it would have looked like nothing at all. A patch of dull stone, dusty and worn by time. But the rover's sensors whispered another story. There, within the rock, were tiny patterns, small circular marks darker than the surrounding clay. They were not cracks or random shadows. They were something else, something deliberate in their shape, mysterious in their rhythm. Scientists back on Earth watched in wonder. The data began to flow across millions of miles of empty space. Light transformed into code, code turned into color, color shaped into meaning. The team at NASA gathered around the screens as the image sharpened. The stones seemed to bloom with specks of black and brown, each one no larger than a grain of sand. They were scattered like constellations across a miniature sky. Someone whispered, "It looks like leopard spots." The name stuck instantly. Leopard spots. Simple. Playful. But behind that gentle nickname lay a current of awe. For those who studied ancient Earth, such patterns had meaning. On our own planet, similar textures had been found in places where life once thrived in mudstones and riverbeds, where microbes had fed, grown, and left their trace in minerals. Could Mars be showing us the same signature? The rock came from an area known as Chayava Falls, part of the Bright Angel Formation, near the edge of the old Neretva Vallis Channel. Long ago, water had rushed through this place, carving pathways into the planet's skin. Now, billions of years later, Percy stood where those rivers once flowed, reading the diary Mars had written in silt and stone. Using its instruments, Percy began to study the rock. Pixel analyzed its elements through X-ray fluorescence, while Sherlock scanned for organic compounds. The results were breathtaking. The stone wasn't just random clay. It contained carbon, phosphorus, iron, and other building blocks of life. Under magnification, each dark spot appeared to have an outer ring richer in iron and phosphorus surrounding a lighter center of ordinary material. It was like a halo, the kind formed when something once alive changes the chemistry of its surroundings. The scientists fell into a hush. On Earth, such formations often meant microbial activity. Microbes that fed on iron, reducing it as part of their metabolism, could leave behind patterns just like these. And so, amid the red dust and thin air, Percy might have found not just rock, but memory, a fossilized whisper of life itself. Still, the team was cautious. The history of Mars was filled with false hope, and every scientist knew that excitement could be dangerous. "Let's rule out everything else first," one of them said softly. The room nodded. That's how science works. Doubt, first belief, later. Yet even as they tried to calm their hearts, something in them stirred. Because for all the skepticism in the world, there was also wonder. Imagine it billions of years ago, this same crater might have been filled with water shimmering under a peach-colored sky. The air would have been denser, then the sun warmer. Rivers would have carried minerals and nutrients, settling them gently into the basin. In that shallow lake, perhaps tiny forms of life had drifted, fragile, unseen, but alive. And now, across the gulf of time, a lonely robot had found their echo. Percy took more samples, drilling carefully into the surface. The sound of the drill echoed faintly through the thin atmosphere, the only noise for miles. Tiny plumes of dust rose and fell. Inside the machine, a small tube sealed itself around a piece of the rock, an artifact from another age. That fragment would one day perhaps be brought home to Earth to be held in human hands. For now, it slept in a titanium cradle aboard the rover, waiting. The landscape around Percy remained still. The wind moved softly over the plains, stirring little ghosts of dust into the air. The horizon glowed faintly orange, fading to purple as the sun dipped. Above, the sky was not empty. It shimmered faintly with traces of ice, thin clouds drifting like silver veils. In that quiet, the rover seemed almost alive, as though it too could feel the gravity of what it had found. Back on Earth, the discovery sent ripples through every lab, every newspaper, every sleepless dreamer staring up at the night sky. People wondered aloud, could these leopard spots be the fingerprints of alien microbes? Could it be that life in some ancient chapter of the universe had blossomed twice, once on Earth and once here? For children who looked at Mars through backyard telescopes, the idea was magic. For scientists, it was both thrilling and terrifying. Because to find life elsewhere would mean rewriting everything we know about existence and about ourselves. Percy's discovery didn't come with answers, only questions. But questions are how humanity dreams. They are how we reach beyond our own sky. As the sun set on that distant planet, Percy powered down for the night. Its cameras turned toward the fading horizon, capturing one last image, the red desert scattered with shadows glowing faintly under a thin crescent of Earthlight. Somewhere out there, a tiny rover sat beneath the stars, keeping watch over the silent proof that Mars had once been more than dust. And down here, millions of miles away, humanity dreamed a little differently that night. Because maybe, just maybe, the universe had begun to whisper back. The story was far from over. Tomorrow the scientists would begin to question everything they thought they saw. They would challenge their own hope test, their own faith in the patterns of stone. But for now, the world could rest. The red desert had spoken, and the stars above it seemed to hum a lullaby of their own. Sleep well, dear listener. Tomorrow we return to Mars again, to search not only for life, but for understanding. The world awoke to wonder once again. The discovery of the tiny leopard spots rippled across every screen, every conversation, every quiet moment of reflection beneath the night sky. Yet even as awe spread, the scientists at NASA grew quieter, more deliberate. They knew that every answer on Mars comes wrapped in a dozen new questions. And so, while the rest of humanity dreamed of Martian life, Perseverance prepared to look deeper, to peel back the layers of stone and time, and search for what might lie hidden inside the heart of a single rock. Morning arrived on Mars in a whisper of pale orange light. The thin atmosphere scattered the sun's warmth, painting long shadows across the ground where Perseverance stood silent but alive with purpose. In the stillness, the rover turned its instruments toward the rock. Once more, Chayava Falls, the strange stone that seemed to hum with mystery. Dust clung to its surface like old memory, as if it too knew it was being watched. The rock wasn't large, not much bigger than a loaf of bread. Yet inside its muted colors lay the echoes of something extraordinary. Pixels, sensors, gentle and patient, swept across the surface, tracing patterns invisible to the human eye. The data streamed back to Earth line by line, light by light, building a picture that no one had ever seen before. And what emerged was astonishing tiny concentrations of carbon, phosphorus, and iron, arranged into elegant rings, as though the planet itself had once tried to write in code. On Earth, such combinations often tell a very specific story. Carbon, the backbone of life. Phosphorus, the spark that powers the cell. Iron, the silent carrier of oxygen and energy. Together they form the alphabet of existence. And here they were whispering from a place that hadn't known life, or perhaps had long ago. For the scientists watching from mission control, this discovery was not a shout, but a murmur. A quiet trembling, maybe. They'd seen rocks rich in organics before, but never quite like this. These patterns were organized, intentional in their geometry. Nature makes chaos. Life, even at its simplest, makes rhythm. Dr. Elena Ruiz, one of the lead astrobiologists, sat before the monitor with her hand pressed to her lips. She had studied microbial fossils for decades, tracing the earliest whispers of life in Earth's oldest sediments. "It's almost poetic," she said softly, her voice barely audible. "It's like the same handwriting, written by a different world." But caution shadowed her wonder. She remembered the long history of disappointment, false alarms that once set hearts racing only to end in quiet disillusion. The Viking experiments in the 1970s, the meteorite in the 90s, the endless maybes that dissolved into may not be's. Science, she knew, was built not on certainty, but on patience. And so they began to test every other possibility. Could the patterns have been formed by chemistry alone? Perhaps volcanic heat or mineral reactions had shaped them. But the evidence resisted those explanations. There were no signs of intense heat nearby, no traces of acid strong enough to etch these intricate layers. What remained was subtle and hauntingly familiar. The delicate balance of conditions that on Earth always led to life. As the data continued to flow, Percy turned its camera toward the horizon. The crater stretched endlessly, a fossil of a lake that once shimmered beneath ancient skies. If Mars had ever held life, this was the place it would have chosen. The basin, the minerals, the gentle slopes, all perfect for sheltering the fragile beginnings of something alive. In that stillness, it was easy to imagine. Billions of years ago, perhaps, sunlight filtered through a soft, thicker atmosphere. Rivers ran freely, feeding a vast lake that rippled in the wind. In those shallow waters, specks of living matter drifted too small for eyes to see, but each one carrying the quiet defiance of life. Maybe they thrived there for millennia, until the planet cooled, and the rivers vanished, leaving only dust to tell their story. And now, across time itself, A little machine built by their distant cosmic relatives had returned searching for them. It was a thought that softened even the most skeptical heart. Percy's robotic arm lowered once more. Its drill pressed into the stone slow and steady, until a thin core emerged, Martian mudstone untouched since the lake dried. The sound of the drill vibrated faintly through the thin air, echoing like a heartbeat in the silence. Inside the rover's chamber, the sample was sealed in a titanium tube, labeled and stored. Somewhere deep within that small cylinder might rest the oldest message ever sent, not in words, but in atoms. The scientists named the sample Sapphire Canyon. The name carried beauty, but also hope. It would be one of the treasures sent back to Earth in a future mission, a time capsule of a world that once breathed differently. Until then, it would wait inside Percy, as the rover continued its slow pilgrimage across the crater floor. As the day faded, the shadows grew long again. The red sands glowed like embers under the waning light. Percy paused to capture the landscape in one last image, a panoramic sweep of rocks, dunes, and distant hills bathed in gold. The photograph, when it reached Earth days later, would silence even the busiest rooms. People would stare at it, sensing something they couldn't quite name, a strange mixture of familiarity and loss. For scientists, that feeling has a name: the humility of discovery. Because to find traces of life elsewhere is not just to learn about another planet, it is to remember how fragile our own existence truly is. Every rock, every cell, every breath we take is a continuation of that same cosmic story written in minerals and memory. As darkness fell, Mars turned its face away from the sun, revealing a sky strewn with stars. Among them was Earth, a small blue shimmer near the horizon. It twinkled faintly through the thin clouds as if watching. Percy stood motionless beneath it, its metal body cooling in the night frost, sensors dimming one by one. The data had been sent. The work was done for now. Back on Earth, humanity leaned closer to their screens, to their dreams, to their prayers. Somewhere in the silence of space, they hoped an answer had been written, not in mathematics, but in stone. And perhaps in that quiet moment between doubt and belief, the universe smiled, knowing that its oldest secret was beginning to be heard once again. For days after the discovery, the air at NASA felt charged with something both electric and fragile. The data from Percy's instruments filled digital walls with colors and numbers, and yet behind every calculation lived a question that refused to rest. Could this really be life? Hope whispered in every conversation, but so did caution. The scientists had learned that truth, like light, must pass through many filters before it becomes clear. And so began a new phase of the mission, one not driven by excitement, but by discipline, patience, and the humility to doubt even the things one wishes most to believe. Science has its own kind of faith, not blind, but listening. It waits, it tests it, questions again and again, until all that remains is what cannot be denied. That was the spirit that guided the Perseverance team as they examined the strange chemistry of the Chayava Falls rock. What they had found seemed to echo the patterns of microbial life, yet the echo was faint, almost ghost-like. To hear it clearly, they needed to silence every other possible source of sound. Dr. Elena Ruiz sat late one evening in the mission lab, her face lit by the soft blue glow of spectral graphs. The others had gone home, but she stayed her fingers tracing lines of data on the screen, like a pianist touching sheet music. In the numbers she sought, not proof of life, but proof of what life was not. The more she read, the quieter her thoughts became until all that remained was wonder and worry. What if this is just chemistry, pretending to be life? She whispered to the silence. It wasn't skepticism born of fear. It was respect for the universe, for the truth, for the possibility that the story written in Martian rock might be far stranger than human imagination. The team met again the next morning. They reviewed every theory that could explain the leopard spots without invoking biology. Could they have been formed by volcanic gases? The chemical ratios did not agree. Could they be the product of heat pressure or acidic water? None. The surrounding terrain bore no sign of such extremes. Again and again the questions circled back to the same conclusion. Nothing seemed to fit, except the faint, improbable whisper of something once alive. Still, they refused to rush. They remembered the history of mistakes, how Vikings tests in the 1970s had once been hailed as proof of life, only to be undone decades later by the discovery of perch lauret in Martian soil, how a meteorite in 1996 had carried what looked like fossilized bacteria, but turned out to be no more than the patient work of minerals. Mars, it seemed, had always been a master of illusion, a storyteller that could make stone look like flesh. So the scientists worked slowly, peeling back each layer of assumption, each bias. Theirs was not a race toward belief, but a pilgrimage toward understanding. They tested, compared, argued, doubted. And in that long process, something beautiful began to happen. The more they doubted, the deeper their wonder grew. Because doubt, when carried with care, does not destroy faith, it purifies it. Outside, the days on Mars slipped by in quiet rhythm. The sun rose over Jezero crater like a pale coin in the sky. Percy rolled onward, collecting more samples, mapping the subtle contours of a planet that once may have known rain. Its instruments hummed softly, a kind of mechanical prayer in the wind. Every night when the rover powered down to rest, mission control would go still. On the monitors, the red horizon would fade to black. For the people who had devoted years of their lives to this project, those moments of silence carried a strange peace. The peace of knowing that some truths do not come quickly. Dr. Ruiz often found herself thinking of Earth's own beginnings. Billions of years ago, life here had been nothing more than chemistry, restless molecules swirling in oceans of possibility. Perhaps Mars had reached the same point only to fall silent before the spark could take hold. If so, these rocks were not just evidence of what had lived, but what might have been. That thought filled her with both sadness and gratitude. To search for life, she realized, was also to search for humility. It was to admit that we are not the measure of the cosmos, but its students. Every discovery, every failed hypothesis, every scrap of data was another lesson in patience. Science, like faith, required surrender, the courage to let the truth reveal itself in its own time. As more results came in, the data began to form a pattern of its own. The team couldn't say for certain what they were seeing, but they knew one thing: whatever had shaped those minerals had done so in the presence of water. And where there is water, there is always a chance. Not a guarantee, but a chance for life. In quiet moments, they would talk about what it would mean if life truly had existed there. Would it change our religions, our philosophies, our sense of purpose? Or would it simply remind us of something we've always known, that life by its nature seeks company? One evening, as the last rays of sunlight flickered across the crater, Percy turned its camera upward. The image it captured showed Earth a tiny blue glimmer above the horizon, fragile and bright. Back home, when that photo appeared on the screen, the room fell silent. For a moment, every debate, every calculation stopped. All that mattered was the sight of that little world glowing like a promise. "We're not just looking for life out there," Dr. Ruiz said softly. "We're trying to understand our own." Her words lingered long after she spoke them. Because in the end, the mission was not about confirming or denying, but about listening. Listening to the universe, to the rocks, to the echoes of something greater than ourselves. When the lights dimmed and the monitors went dark, the scientists left the lab one by one. Outside, the night was cool and clear. Above them, Mars glimmered faintly in the sky, no longer just a point of light, but a place of questions. Sacred questions waiting to be answered. And as they walked home under that watchful red glow, a thought followed them like a shadow. Maybe truth is not something we find, but something we learn to approach gently, step by step, with open hands and quiet hearts. The search would continue. The doubt would remain. But somewhere in that tension between wonder and skepticism, hope and humility, humanity had already found a deeper kind of life. The kind that awakens not in planets, but in the soul. Night settled softly over both worlds. On Earth, laboratories went dark one by one, and the hum of machines gave way to the slow rhythm of thought. On Mars, Perseverance lay still beneath a cold sky, the dust clinging to its body like sleep. The questions it had raised now echoed through human minds everywhere, scientists, dreamers, believers, each wondering what these new findings meant. But before anyone could move forward, humanity had to look back. The story of Mars had always been one of hope and heartbreak, of discovery and disappointment. To understand this new dawn, one had to remember all the false dawns that came before. The search for life beyond Earth has always been a mirror, not of the cosmos, but of ourselves. Each time we peer into the stars, we are really asking, who are we, and are we alone in this vast, breathing dark? Long before Perseverance rolled across the dust of Jezero, other machines, other hearts had already carried that question into the red sky. Their stories still linger like old songs from another age, filled with both wonder and sorrow. It began in the 1970s when the Viking landers touched down on Mars for the very first time. For generations, humans had imagined canals and civilizations there, dreams that science would soon erase, yet never quite extinguish. When Vikings' experiments began, they were designed to be cautious, mechanical, unromantic. A robot would scoop Martian soil, mix it with nutrients tagged with a radioactive marker, and then measure any gases released. If life were there, even the smallest microbe it would breathe. It would leave a signature, and then something astonishing happened. The detectors lit up. Carbon dioxide was released exactly as expected. For a heartbeat, humanity held its breath. Could it be? Was this the moment the universe finally whispered back? Newspapers called it a miracle. Scientists argued through the night. Churches spoke of new creation. Skeptics spoke of error. And then quietly, the dream began to fade. Years later, with better instruments and cooler heads, researchers found that Mars's soil contained perchlorate, a strong oxidizing agent. When heated during the experiment, it destroyed organics and released gas mimicking the breath of life. What had seemed like a heartbeat was just chemistry pretending to be alive. The disappointment was heavy, not because science had failed, but because hope had risen too fast. The image of Mars dimmed again, turning from a world of potential into a cold, silent mirror of our loneliness. Yet still, humanity did not stop looking. 2 decades later, in 1996, the hope returned not from Mars directly, but from a rock that had fallen to Earth thousands of years before. It was a meteorite named ALH 84001, found in the frozen stillness of Antarctica. Scientists examined it under electron microscopes and saw within it tiny curved structures, shapes that resembled fossilized bacteria. They were impossibly small, older than imagination, and unmistakably deliberate in form. The world stopped. Television anchors spoke of alien life with trembling excitement. President Bill Clinton stood before the nation and announced that we might have found proof that life existed elsewhere in our solar system. For a brief, shining moment, humanity believed again. But time, as always, brought its quiet corrections. Later studies showed those shapes could be formed through natural processes, water pressure and rock dancing together without life's hand. What had looked like ancient microbes were no more than mineral sculptures, beautiful but empty. Another candle snuffed out in the cold. Still, these disappointments were not wasted. Each one taught a deeper lesson, that the road to truth is long, and that even false lights help us see the path. Every mistake sharpened the instruments, refined the questions, and reminded scientists that faith in discovery must be tempered with humility. Even in failure, the heart of exploration never stopped beating. The dreamers kept dreaming. Because in the silence of every no, there lingers the promise of a future yes. And so came the new generation of explorers, spirit, opportunity, curiosity. Each one a child of those earlier lessons. They walked softly across the planet, taking photos of sunsets, dust devils, and silent hills that once might have known rain. Every mission brought us closer to the truth. Yet each confirmed the same melancholy fact. If Mars had ever been alive, it had died long ago. The world remained a beautiful ruin, a graveyard of possibility. But human hearts are stubborn things. Even as evidence of life slipped further from reach, belief persisted. Not the kind of belief born in fantasy, but the quiet kind, the belief that to search is meaningful, even when the answer is silence. And then decades later came perseverance. Unlike its predecessors, it didn't search for living creatures. It searched for memory, for chemistry frozen in time. It carried not just tools, but the accumulated wisdom of generations who had once believed too quickly. Its name was no accident. Perseverance, the virtue that keeps hope alive through 1,000 small heartbreaks. Dr. Elena Ruiz. Reading through old mission archives late one evening, found herself smiling sadly at a headline from 1976, "Life on Mars." Confirmed. She could imagine the joy that headline had once inspired the late-night calls, the champagne. The sense that humanity had crossed an invisible threshold. She wondered how many of those scientists had felt the sting of correction, later the quiet heartbreak of being wrong. Yet she also wondered if they regretted it. Probably not. Because even to be wrong about something so beautiful is still to have reached toward it with all one's heart. As Percy continued its lonely travels across the crater, Dr. Ruiz thought of all the stories that had come before. The false alarms, the lessons, the patience earned through decades of disappointment. She felt gratitude for them. Without those first dreamers, there would have been no rover, no mission, no moment like this. The failures had not been wasted. They had been seeds. Outside her window, the night sky shimmered. Mars hung there small, red, almost shy. She pressed her hand to the glass, not in worship, but in recognition. "You fooled us before," she whispered softly, "but we'll keep listening. Because somewhere in all your silence, we still hear music. Perhaps that is the true gift of exploration, not the answers it brings, but the persistence it demands. Each wrong turn teaches the way. Each illusion refines our sight. And somewhere between failure and faith, the human spirit learns how to keep going." When the lights dimmed in the lab that night, Dr. Ruiz lingered for a moment longer, gazing at the faint image of the leopard spots still glowing on her screen. The story of Mars was not finished. It was only pausing, catching its breath between questions. Because the universe, she thought, doesn't lie. It only speaks slowly. And maybe this time humanity had finally learned how to listen. The stories of past hopes lingered, like echoes in the corridors of NASA, faint reminders that wonder often walks hand in hand with heartbreak. Yet this time felt different. The silence after each disappointment had made the scientists wiser, calmer, more patient. They no longer chased miracles. They listened for them. And so, as Perseverance continued its slow journey across Jezero's scarred basin, those who guided it from millions of miles away carried a gentler kind of faith, one not born of excitement but of endurance. The room was quiet, save for the hum of monitors and the rhythmic beeping of instruments. It was late again, the kind of hour when cities sleep and ideas stir softly in the dark. Dr. Elena Ruiz sat at her desk, her hands cradling a cup of cold coffee, her eyes fixed on a single line of data glowing across the screen. The results were promising, too promising. She leaned back, exhaling slowly as if afraid that breathing too loudly might disturb the fragile truth unfolding before her. NASA had learned from its scars. No one in the room dared to call this discovery life. Not yet. The word itself felt sacred, dangerous even. To pronounce it too soon would be to risk another heartbreak, not just for the scientific community, but for the billions of quiet hearts on Earth waiting to believe. So they chose their language carefully, weaving restraint into every sentence. Organic compounds, they said. Biosignature candidates. Possible ancient chemistry. Never life. Not yet. And yet, beneath that professional caution, hope glowed like an ember. Every scientist there, no matter how rational or trained, carried a secret longing, the yearning to witness something greater than humanity itself. They had all felt it as children staring at the night sky, whispering wishes into the darkness. That childlike part of them still lived hidden behind the equations and graphs. Dr. Ruiz understood the balance between dream and discipline better than most. She had joined NASA in her 20s, back when ambition burned hot and loud. Decades later, her fire had cooled, but not dimmed. It had become steadier, wiser, like a lantern in a storm. She knew that real discovery was not made in moments of celebration, but in the long, quiet patience of waiting. The truth doesn't need us to chase it, she would often tell her students. It needs us to stay still long enough to hear it. Outside the glass walls of Mission Control, the California night shimmered with stars. Beyond them, far away and silent, Mars turned slowly in its orbit, its thin atmosphere glowing faintly at the edges. There, Perseverance moved across the dusty plains, its metal body reflecting sunlight like a single spark in a vast sea of red. It wasn't searching blindly. It was listening, reading the whispers of wind, the memory of minerals, the long sleep of stone. Every transmission that arrived was treated like a heartbeat. Images of layered sediment of pebbles, shaped by water of chemical fingerprints, hinting at organic matter. To the untrained eye, they were just patterns of light and color. But to the team, they were the language of the past written not in words, but in elements. Still, each discovery was followed by silence, the pause of disbelief, the ritual of verification. For weeks, they repeated tests, adjusted calibrations, challenged their own interpretations. Doubt wasn't an obstacle here. It was a form of reverence. "We can't afford to be wrong," one researcher said quietly. "The universe doesn't forgive impatience." And yet in those long pauses, something remarkable happened. The waiting became part of the wonder. Each night as data trickled in, the scientists would gather around the monitors, not speaking much, just watching. Sometimes they would share a faint smile, a nod, a whispered maybe. It was enough. In those small moments of restraint, faith and science found common ground, the humility to admit how little we truly know. Dr. Ruiz often thought about how exploration had changed over the centuries. Once humans had set sail across oceans, mapping the unknown with stars and courage. Now they mapped the heavens themselves, guided by equations and metal rovers. But the heart of it was the same, a longing to see beyond the horizon, to know what waits in the silence. The caution they carried wasn't fear, it was respect. Respect for the past mistakes, for the fragile balance between discovery and desire. They remembered how excitement had once led them astray, how the Viking landers and the meteorite had stirred the world too quickly. So now they moved like monks in a sacred ritual, guarding every word, every claim, as if protecting the purity of truth itself. Still, even the most disciplined hearts dream. Late at night, when the lights dimmed and the hum of the machines softened, the scientists would glance at the faint dot of Mars on the big screen and allow themselves a small, secret thought. What if this time it's real? Meanwhile, Percy continued its lonely pilgrimage. It wandered across the crater's rim, stopping to examine rocks that had waited billions of years to be touched again. Each grain of dust held the weight of eons, and each shadow stretched across memories of ancient rivers. The rover's instruments hummed in perfect rhythm, a symphony of patience in the great silence. Sometimes when Percy sent back panoramic images, the team would project them on the large wall screen. The room would fill with the crimson landscape, vast and endless. It was almost like standing there. You could almost feel the thin wind brushing against your skin, hear the faint creak of rock cooling under twilight. And in those moments, a quiet reverence settled over everyone. It felt less like science and more like prayer. Do you ever think, one young engineer asked one night, that Mars is testing us? Like it's waiting to see if we're worthy of its secrets. Dr. Ruiz smiled, her eyes reflecting the dusty horizon on the screen. Maybe, she said softly. Or maybe Mars is just patient. More patient than we've ever been. The others fell silent, lost in thought. Patience. The word lingered in the air like a blessing, because patience was what had brought them here through decades of false hope, through the slow crawl of technology, through the delicate balance between skepticism and faith. And perhaps that was the lesson all along, that the universe reveals its mysteries not to the loud or the proud, but to the humble, to those who wait, who listen, who dare to dream quietly. As the night stretched on, the team packed up their notes and left one by one. The screens dimmed. Only the image of Mars remained glowing faintly in the dark like a candle. Somewhere out there, Perseverance rested its sensors, cooling under a thin frost. Above it, Earth shone like a distant jewel, a reminder that the seekers of truth were never truly far away. In the hush that followed, the universe seemed to breathe not in answers but in peace. And for the first time in a long while, humanity was not rushing toward the stars. It was simply waiting in awe. And so the waiting continued, soft, deliberate, almost sacred. The scientists had learned that truth did not come in shouts, but in whispers. While humanity's curiosity simmered in quiet awe, Perseverance pressed on through the Martian dawn, tracing the edges of Jezero like a pilgrim moving through holy ruins. The crater was no longer just a basin of dust and stone. It had become a sanctuary of memory. Every pebble seemed to hold a story waiting to be told, and Percy, faithful and unhurried, was there to listen. In the vast stillness of Mars, silence is not empty. It is ancient. It hums softly through the thin air, wrapping the planet like a memory that refuses to fade. When Perseverance began its slow trek across the old delta, it was as though time itself leaned closer to watch. Each rotation of its wheels stirred grains of dust that had rested untouched for billions of years, releasing ghosts of rivers that once carved their way through these plains. The rover's route was carefully planned, a pilgrimage between geological landmarks chosen for their promise. Scientists back on Earth followed its every move through delayed transmissions, holding their breath as it approached its next great task, the collection of Martian samples. These were not just stones. They were time capsules, pages torn from a planetary diary older than life on Earth itself. The mission, known as the Mars Sample Return, was humanity's most ambitious scientific dream, a plan to bring pieces of another world home. Percy's job was to collect, seal, and safeguard these fragments for a future mission that would one day lift them from the Martian surface and carry them back across the void. It was a dream generations in the making, a promise whispered between scientists who had grown old before seeing it fulfilled. As Percy began drilling into the first target, the hum of its machinery vibrated faintly through the air. A small sound swallowed quickly by the wind. Dust rose and settled again, as if the planet sighed. Each tube filled with a fragment of the past mudstone clay silt, all formed in water long gone. When the sample sealed shut with a metallic click, it was like the closing of a sacred book. Back on Earth, the mission control room filled with a stillness deeper than applause. Everyone watched the data confirm the success. The first of many cores collected, preserved perfectly inside its titanium chamber. It was a quiet triumph, one that did not need celebration. Because every scientist in that room knew they were no longer just observers of Mars. They were its archivists. They called the sample Sapphire Canyon. The name carried both beauty and gratitude, a small act of reverence for a rock that might one day rewrite humanity's story. It would rest inside the rover, waiting for the day another craft would come to retrieve it, a day that might not arrive for years, perhaps decades. But time, they reminded themselves, moves differently in the language of discovery. As Percy moved to the next site, the terrain changed. The bright flat plains gave way to rugged slopes scattered with fractured boulders. Some were streaked with mineral veins that shimmered faintly under the weak sunlight, like veins of memory running through the bones of the planet. These were the stones that slept, the keepers of stories untold. At night, when the rover's systems powered down, the temperature plunged far below freezing. Thin frost spread across the metal hull, glinting in the pale light of Phobos and Deimos, the two moons of Mars. From above, Percy looked like a silver insect resting beneath an ocean of stars. If machines could dream, perhaps it dreamed of home, of blue skies, and the distant voices that guided it through the dark. On Earth, Dr. Elena Ruiz found herself thinking often about those stones, how they waited untouched for so long. She imagined the moment billions of years ago, when water had flowed here, carrying sediments from distant rivers. Each layer that Percy drilled through was a sentence in a story too vast for any one mind to grasp. "We are reading the autobiography of time," she wrote in her notes. "Every grain of dust is a memory that refuses to die. But dreams, even scientific ones, come with their own shadows." The Mars sample return mission, as grand as it was, faced staggering challenges. Budgets shifted. Political tides changed. Reports circulated of delays, of cost overruns, of arguments between agencies. Some said the project might not happen at all. Others insisted that it must. Humanity, they argued, could not stop here. Not when the door to another chapter of creation had already been cracked open. At NASA headquarters, meetings stretched long into the night. The faces around the table carried the weariness of people who had seen too many miracles postponed by paperwork. Yet through it all, there remained a quiet determination. The samples already sealed aboard Percy represented something no bureaucracy could destroy, a covenant between curiosity and time. "We might never see them return," Dr. Ruiz admitted one evening, her voice calm but steady. "But someone will. Someday a child not yet born will hold these stones in their hands and see what we could only imagine." That's how knowledge works. It always asks us to believe in a future we may never enter. The thought comforted her. It made the long wait feel sacred rather than futile. As weeks turned into months, Percy continued its slow ballet across the crater, its tracks etching a fragile path through eternity. Above it, the sky blushed in muted tones of salmon and gold, the light scattering differently through the thin air. Every sunrise felt like a small resurrection, a reminder that even in desolation, beauty survives. Sometimes when Earth appeared faintly blue on the horizon, Mission Control would project its image on the wall, so small, so far. The room would fall silent. There, someone would whisper, "That's home." And for a brief moment, Mars and Earth seemed to breathe together, two ancient worlds bound by the same quiet yearning to be known, to be remembered. In that connection lay the true heart of exploration. The stones Percy gathered were more than evidence. They were bridges between planets, between times, between questions and the courage to ask them. As night descended once more on Jezero crater, the rover stood still beneath the stars, its samples secured, its lights dimmed. The wind whispered softly across the dunes, carrying the same dust that once touched water, sunlight, and perhaps life itself. Somewhere in that sleeping silence, the stones dreamed too, not of being discovered, but of being understood. And the universe, infinite and patient, waited with them. The stones that Perseverance gathered now rested safely inside their metallic chambers, sealed against time itself. They were silent, but not voiceless. Within their compact weight lay stories older than life, waiting for the moment humanity would learn how to read them. On Earth, scientists stared at the data flowing in chemical traces, mineral spectra, the subtle fingerprints of something that might once have lived. To them, these were not just rocks. They were whispers, murmurs from a forgotten age. The question now was not whether Mars could keep its secrets, but whether humanity had grown wise enough to listen to them. Every discovery begins with a whisper. Not a shout, not a blinding revelation, but a soft murmur that tugs at curiosity and refuses to let go. That was how it felt in the labs back on Earth as the data from Percy's samples began to trickle in. Line after line of numbers, wavelengths, and ratios scrolled across the screens, a silent language that spoke of carbon, nitrogen, and ancient water. Most people would see chaos, but to those who had spent their lives chasing the origins of life, it was poetry. Dr. Elena Ruiz leaned closer to the display, her eyes tracing the delicate curves of spectral peaks. Somewhere in those curves lay a possibility so profound that her breath caught without her realizing it. The data hinted at something deeply organized, something that bore the subtle symmetry of biology. But science is not a faith of immediate belief. It is one of careful listening, of asking questions, even when the heart wants to shout the answer. She took a sip of her now cold tea and whispered to herself, "Let's hear what you're trying to say." Mars did not speak in words. It spoke in isotopes and molecular bonds, in ratios of elements and patterns of asymmetry that only the patient could decode. And so the scientists began the long process of translation. They searched for the two signatures that on Earth always accompany life: chirality and carbon isotopes. Chirality, the handedness of molecules, is one of nature's quiet miracles. Every amino acid, every building block of life can exist in two forms, mirror images of each other, left-handed and right-handed. On our planet, all known life prefers the left-handed version, as if guided by an ancient universal rule. Non-living chemistry, by contrast, produces both equally. So if the molecules inside those Martian rocks leaned more toward one hand than the other, it would be a message not random but intentional, written by something that once breathed. For days and nights, the labs hummed with anticipation. Instruments fine-tuned their lasers, computers processed endless simulations. and researchers took turns watching, waiting for the results that might shift the world's understanding of itself. Yet amid the excitement, there was quiet reverence too, a sense that they were standing on the edge of something sacred. The first analysis came through in faint, tentative signals, not strong enough to prove anything, not weak enough to dismiss. The ratio was uneven, a subtle tilt just beyond coincidence. The data whispered maybe. And in science, maybe is a word powerful enough to keep an entire generation awake. Then came the isotope tests. Every living thing, no matter how small, carries a preference for lighter carbon-12 over carbon-13. It's a quirk of metabolism, a fingerprint left by the hunger of life itself. On Mars, the scientists found traces of that same imbalance, faint but there, a pattern that nature rarely draws without purpose. The room went still when the results appeared. The monitors glowed softly in the dark, each line of data pulsing like a heartbeat. No one spoke for a long while. To speak too soon would be to break the fragile silence that discovery requires. Finally, Dr. Ruiz exhaled. "It's not proof," she said softly, "but it's beautiful." She thought of all the nights humanity had spent, gazing upward, wondering if the stars were watching back. Maybe in some distant past they had. Maybe Mars had once been a cradle of its own, a world that knew warmth, rain, and life before the silence came. The idea did not frighten her. It filled her with peace. Because even if that life was gone, its echoes were not. And to find even an echo was to find kinship across time and space. But beauty alone could not sway science. The results had to be tested again and again and again. Different labs, different teams, different continents. No single voice could claim the truth. Only the harmony of many could make it real. And so the work continued. Samples were simulated in chambers recreated in controlled environments. Their chemistry unraveled one atom at a time. Outside the lab windows, winter spread across the desert where NASA's complex stood. The night skies were clear, cold, infinite. Dr. Ruiz often stayed late, unable to tear herself from the quiet glow of the data. She thought of Percy up there, still wandering the dunes, still keeping its silent vigil under two small moons. It was strange. The rover was just a machine, yet it felt like an extension of the human heart itself, reaching out across the gulf of the unknown. Sometimes she would imagine what the molecules inside those Martian stones might remember: the ripple of water over silt, the slow dance of minerals forming the brief flicker of something alive. Could chemistry miss being life? Could a planet grieve for its lost creation? She smiled at the thought, half scientist, half poet. One evening, as she watched the red dot of Mars rising low in the horizon, she whispered, "We're listening now." We finally learned how. For that perhaps was the truest discovery of all. Not the proof of alien life, but the evolution of human patience. A century ago we had demanded answers. Now we were learning to wait to hear what the universe was saying in its own slow, precise language. The data would take years to interpret fully. By then, Percy might be silent, covered by the same dust it once studied. But its work would live on in the archives, in the hearts of those who dared to ask questions without rushing toward certainty. Back in her office, Dr. Ruiz turned off the last light. The monitors faded to black, leaving the faint hum of the servers behind her. As she stepped outside, she looked up once more. Mars shimmered faintly above the horizon, small, steady red. She closed her eyes and imagined the rover, the stones, the wind brushing over Jezero crater. And she thought, if the universe could dream, maybe it dreams of us too. The way we listen, the way we hope, the way we love its silence enough to seek its voice. The night was still. Somewhere across the cold distance, the memory of a single molecule waited, patient and eternal, for the next whisper of understanding to arrive. The night Dr. Ruiz left the laboratory, the world outside felt different still. The same desert air, the same sky, freckled with stars, but something deep within her had changed. For the first time she sensed that the line between life and non-life was thinner than she'd ever imagined. Somewhere out there beneath layers of red dust and time, Mars was keeping a secret, and humanity had finally learned to listen with both reason and reverence. Yet for every whisper that sounded like life caution followed like a shadow. To dream was human, but to measure that dream, that was science. In the quiet corridors of NASA, words like life-proof and discovery had begun to move with delicate care. The excitement of the world outside was growing. Headlines spoke of signs of ancient biology, and television anchors tried to make sense of what no one yet fully understood. But inside the mission's command center, caution ruled. The scientists knew that between finding a hint of life and confirming its existence stood a mountain of tests, verifications, and skepticism. Truth in science was not declared, it was earned. To navigate this uncertainty, NASA had developed something new, a framework called the Confidence of Life Detection Scale. It was a ladder of sorts, 7 levels that stretched from speculation to certainty, guiding how humanity would interpret each step toward the profound. Level 1. An observation that might be caused by life. Level 7. Confirmation verified and replicated by independent teams beyond all doubt. It was not just a tool of classification. It was a philosophy, a way to discipline hope. Dr. Ruiz often thought of that scale late at night. Each level was like a rung carved from patience and humility. She imagined herself climbing it slowly, step by careful step, knowing that a single misstep could send the world's faith tumbling down. Humanity had been here before, with Viking, with the meteorite, with every promise that had turned to silence. This time there would be no rushing, no shouting into the stars. Still wonder lingered in every corner of the lab. The data arriving from Perseverance was more compelling than anything seen before. The patterns of organics, the delicate isotopic ratios they held together under scrutiny. Yet even as evidence gathered, the scientists spoke in the same gentle tone, balancing awe with restraint. "What level do you think we're at now?" one young intern asked during a late shift, his voice full of unguarded hope. "Doctor," Ruiz smiled faintly, not unkindly. "Somewhere between 3 and 4, she said. "We've seen something that could be life, maybe even shaped by life, but until we bring those samples home, we can't be sure. And even then, the universe tends to test our patience." The intern nodded, eyes fixed on the glowing monitors. "Level 4, he murmured, as though tasting the words. "That's still halfway to heaven." She laughed softly. "And heaven is a place where proof and mystery live together." Those words stayed with her as she watched the team at work. Every scientist there carried their own quiet theology, not of religion, but of reverence. The discipline of their work was not cold or mechanical. It was tender, almost devotional. They knew they were touching something sacred, the first possibility that life might not be Earth's alone. Outside the walls of NASA, however, patience was harder to find. The public wanted answers. Journalists asked for conclusions. Politicians demanded justification for the billions of dollars spent. Each press release was a balancing act, a careful dance between transparency and restraint. Possible biosignatures detected, the reports would say, further study required. Behind those neutral phrases lay sleepless nights, trembling hands, and the weight of history pressing down on every word. Sometimes when the pressure grew too heavy, Dr. Ruiz would step outside into the quiet of the California night. She would look up at Mars, a small red ember glowing above the horizon, and think about how far humanity had come. Centuries ago, the stars had been gods. Now, they were questions, and perhaps she thought that was an even holier way to see them. One evening, after another long session of data review, she gathered the younger scientists together. "I want you to remember something," she told them. "If we find proof of life, the world will change. But not in the way people think. It won't divide us into believers and skeptics. It will remind us that creation, whatever its source, is far more generous than we imagined. It gave life here, and maybe long ago, it gave life there too. Either way, we are part of the same story." Her voice was calm, almost melodic, and for a moment the room fell silent, each person caught between science and poetry. The truth of her words wasn't measurable, but it was deeply felt. Meanwhile, Perseverance continued its work far away, collecting, drilling, storing. The little rover was now more than a machine, it had become a messenger. With every sample sealed, it was writing a letter to the future, one that might not be opened for decades. Yet each click of its mechanical arm, each hum of its instruments carried meaning. Every act of observation was an act of faith. In one of its images, the rover captured Earth as a faint blue speck in the Martian twilight. When the photo reached NASA, the team stared at it for a long time. The image was humbling, a reminder that all their effort, all their technology was born from that single fragile world hanging in darkness. "That's us," someone whispered. "All our questions fit inside that dot." Dr. Ruiz smiled. "And maybe," she said quietly, "so do some of the answers." The photo spread across the internet, printed in newspapers, shared in classrooms. For many, it wasn't a scientific milestone, but a moment of reflection. To see Earth from Mars was to feel the smallness of human pride and the greatness of human curiosity. The team continued their analysis, slowly ascending the ladder of confidence, each step cautious and deliberate. They knew that science would never shout what it could only whisper. But still, that whisper grew louder, steadier, carried by the hum of machines and the quiet determination of human hearts. If the data ever reached level 6 or 7, it would be a moment unlike any other in history. Not a discovery of conquest, but of kinship. A realization that life in all its fragile persistence is not unique to Earth. And if that day comes, Dr. Ruiz thought, perhaps humanity will finally understand what Perseverance had been teaching all along, that patience is not the absence of action, but the purest form of faith. As the night deepened and Mars drifted westward in the sky, the lights in NASA's lab dimmed one by one. The world slept unaware that its story was being rewritten grain by grain, atom by atom. The rover continued its steady work under the red horizon, a silent pilgrim gathering proof that the universe has always been alive with possibility. And back on Earth, Dr. Ruiz whispered into the still air, as though the cosmos itself might hear, "We're coming closer." But no matter what we find, the miracle was always that we kept looking. The world moved a little more quietly after that photograph of Earth from Mars began to circle the globe. It wasn't the discovery of life that changed people, it was the reminder of perspective. That faint blue speck seen from a neighboring world made humanity look smaller and more connected than ever before. And while scientists continued their cautious climb up the ladder of evidence, another realization began to bloom in their hearts. Mars wasn't merely a destination for discovery. It was a reflection of time itself, a mirror held up to the earliest memories of our own planet. When the first images of Jezero crater arrived, they felt like déjà vu. Dry riverbeds snaked across the landscape like veins, deltas fanned out into soft, rippling arcs. And layers of sediment told stories in delicate bands of color. It was Mars, yes, but it was also something deeply familiar, as though the planet were showing us a photograph of Earth in its youth. Billions of years ago, before trees, before continents drifted apart, before even the first single cell stirred in a warm ocean, Mars had looked like this. The scientists began to call it, half in jest and half in awe, the time machine. Mars has no tectonic plates to shift its crust, no oceans to grind its surface smooth, no forests or storms to erase its memories. While Earth has spent its existence rewriting its surface, Mars has remained still, preserving its ancient diary in stone and dust. To study its valleys and craters was to read a record that our own planet had long since lost. For geologists and astrobiologists alike, this realization was almost sacred. Every ridge and rock was a sentence written in the oldest language of all, the language of time. Dr. Ruiz often thought of this as she studied the panoramic images sent back by Perseverance. She would trace her fingers along the screen, following the faint curvature of what had once been a river delta. "It's not just Mars we're looking at," she whispered once to her team. "It's a reflection of ourselves, of who we were before we even began." In many ways, Mars had become humanity's oldest relative, the elder sibling who had aged faster, faded sooner, but remembered everything. Its surface carried the scars of volcanoes, the wrinkles of dried lakes, the silence of eons. Scientists could see in those features what Earth must have looked like before it learned to bloom. The discovery filled them not with triumph, but with humility. For the first time, the universe seemed to be showing us not where we might go, but where we had come from. The idea began to change how people spoke about exploration. Space was no longer just a frontier, it was an archive. The rovers, Curiosity, Opportunity, Perseverance were not conquerors but librarians brushing dust off the shelves of creation. Each image, each sample was a page recovered from a book, long thought lost. Humanity had set out to find life, but in the process, it had found its own origins reflected back like an echo. The scientists studying the Jezero crater soon realized something profound. The mineral deposits Percy uncovered, clays, carbonates, and phosphates, were not just random chemistry. They were ingredients, recipes that Earth itself had once followed, when mixing the first droplets of life. To find them preserved on Mars was to glimpse a universal pattern, a cosmic handwriting that transcended worlds. It was as if creation had practiced on Mars before moving on to Earth. Dr. Ruiz sometimes found herself lost in that thought. Maybe we didn't begin here at all, she mused one evening. Maybe we're the continuation of something that started elsewhere. Maybe life isn't a miracle of Earth. It's the language of the universe, and we're just one of its verses. Her words lingered with the team settling over the lab like soft dust. The room fell quiet, not because anyone disagreed, but because the idea carried too much weight to answer immediately. They had come so far chasing proof of alien life, only to find that the real discovery might be our shared ancestry with the cosmos itself. Every evening when the images from Mars appeared on the monitors, they seemed to glow with more than color. The ripples in the sand looked like fingerprints left by time's own hand. The cliffs around the crater resembled pages, each layer a story of flood and drought, of birth and decay. The longer the scientists stared, the more they began to feel that Mars wasn't simply a planet frozen in death. It was a memory preserved in amber, a world caught between what was and what might have been. For the first time, humanity began to feel something beyond curiosity for Mars, something akin to affection. People wrote songs and poems, children sent drawings of red horizons, and artists painted the planet as if it were a lost homeland. Mars had stopped being just a symbol of the future. It had become a relic of the past, a reminder that all planets, even the quiet ones, once danced with fire and water, once held the pulse of potential. At NASA, the conversations shifted. Scientists began to talk about ancestral geology, about using Mars to study not just its own history, but the Earth's forgotten beginnings. The term felt both technical and poetic, perfectly suited to this new era of discovery. In university classrooms, young students stared at images of Martian landscapes and saw for the first time the mirror image of their own planet, billions of years ago. Late one night, as Dr. Ruiz reviewed the latest data, she received a new transmission from Perseverance. The rover had taken a high-resolution photo of the crater floor, its surface dappled with faint wave-like patterns, ripples left behind by ancient water currents. She zoomed in, mesmerized. Each curve was graceful, precise, unmistakable. For a moment, it was as if she were standing there herself, looking down at a river that had not flowed for 3 billion years. In that instant, the vast gulf between past and present collapsed. The rover's camera was her eye. Her wonder was its lens. The connection was complete. Humanity, she realized, had finally learned how to speak with time. She turned off the screen and looked out through the window. Mars shimmered faintly in the distance, its soft red light pulsing like an old heartbeat. She thought of the planet not as a mystery to be solved, but as a teacher. And perhaps that was what Mars had been waiting for all along, not to be discovered, but to be understood. "Thank you," she whispered, as if the wind between worlds could carry her gratitude. For in the stillness of that moment it was clear that Mars had given humanity something greater than proof of life. It had given us memory, our own, written in red stone, preserved by silence, waiting billions of years for us to remember who we were. Mars had become more than a planet. It had become a mirror, a keeper of time. Every new photograph from Perseverance felt like a memory returned to Earth, each line of data, a sentence from a book written long before humankind learned to read the stars. The scientists no longer spoke of conquest or colonization. They spoke in whispers now, with the reverence one reserves for sacred places. For as they dug deeper into Mars's past, they began to sense something extraordinary, that science itself was turning into a kind of prayer. There are moments in human history when the line between knowledge and wonder dissolves completely, when discovery no longer feels like calculation, but communion. That was the atmosphere in the months that followed. Mars had humbled the people studying it. The further they went into its secrets, the quieter they became. For every answer it offered, 10 more mysteries bloomed, each one more delicate, more profound than the last. Dr. Elena Ruiz had begun to change too. She found herself moving more slowly through her days, as though afraid that rushing might disturb the fragile stillness that now seemed to surround everything they did. The laboratory had always been a place of logic, bright with screens and numbers. But lately, it felt different, softer somehow. The sound of the machines seemed almost rhythmic, a heartbeat beneath the hum of fluorescent lights. Even the scientists' voices grew gentler, their words chosen not for precision alone, but for beauty. She often stayed long after everyone else had gone home, sitting beside the wide window that faced the desert. From there, she could see Mars rising red and steady, its light pulsing faintly like a candle burning in eternity. She would sip her tea and listen to the quiet whir of instruments collecting data from across the void. "We are singing to the stars," she once wrote in her notebook, "and they are humming back." Perhaps that was why, to her, the data no longer looked like data. It looked like music patterns of repetition and rest, of harmony and dissonance. The numbers, when plotted, curved like a melody written by the universe itself. Each element had a tone, each reaction a rhythm. And together, they told a story not of Mars alone, but of creation itself. One night, as she reviewed spectra of carbon compounds, she felt an unexpected sense of peace wash over her. The graphs reminded her of ocean waves rising and falling with infinite patience. She leaned back and closed her eyes. In her mind, she could almost hear it. The slow breathing of the cosmos, steady and calm, like the world's oldest lullaby. Science, she realized, was not meant to silence mystery, but to harmonize with it. The deeper they explored Mars, the clearer it became that the universe was not chaotic. After all, it was orchestral. Every atom was part of a symphony too vast to comprehend. The laws of physics were not commands but rhythms, and every life, every planet, was a note in that cosmic song. In team meetings, she began to speak differently. She talked about Mars not as a problem to solve, but as a presence to understand. Her words carried a softness that surprised even her colleagues. "When we measure," she said, "once we are not invading. We are listening." And in that listening, something in them began to change. Even the most hardened engineers felt it, a sense of belonging to something enormous, something tender. Perseverance, miles away under the Martian sun, continued its patient work. The data it sent came like lullabies of dust and silence. The rover's camera captured images of rippled dunes that looked like frozen waves of smooth stones that might have once been worn by water. Each photograph felt like a heartbeat from the past, a pulse from a time when Mars might have sung its own song of life. Back on Earth, Dr. Ruiz found herself drawn to these images, the way one might return to childhood photographs. They carried a familiarity she couldn't explain. Maybe, she mused, the universe repeats itself in love the same way music repeats its notes, to remind us of beauty. Her colleagues began to notice her change. Some found it poetic, others curious. But no one could deny that the feeling was contagious. The language of science in their papers shifted slightly, less mechanical, more lyrical. Sentences once filled with equations now carried metaphors. "This mineral remembers water," one of them wrote. "This clay holds the echo of warmth." It was as if they had all begun to dream while awake. Outside the scientific world, something similar happened. People who once ignored space news began to listen again. The tone of the media softened. Instead of headlines screaming, "Proof of life," there were stories about wonder, about connection. Children began drawing Mars not as a cold, dead planet, but as a sleeping friend, one who had been waiting for us to remember its name. Dr. Ruiz smiled whenever she saw those drawings. She liked to imagine Mars smiling back. Maybe, she said to her team one evening, we were never meant to find life there. Maybe Mars exists to remind us how to look for it here inside us. Her words sank into the silence that followed. No one argued. No one could. Because deep down, everyone felt the truth in them. In seeking Mars, they had begun to rediscover the sanctity of their own small world, the blue dot that had given them eyes to see and hearts to wonder. One afternoon, a new transmission arrived from Perseverance, a video this time. It showed the rover's shadow stretching across the ground as the sun set. The light turned the sky to gold, then to pink, then to a deep purple so pure it looked like velvet. The camera lingered for a few seconds, as if even the machine understood the holiness of stillness. Then the image faded to black. Dr. Ruiz watched it in silence. "Even machines know when to pause," she whispered. "Maybe that's the universe teaching us grace." Later that night, when she left the lab, the air was cool and fragrant with rain. She looked up at the stars and thought of the rover sleeping under a different sky. In that instant, the distance between Earth and Mars vanished. There was no separation, only connection woven through light and silence. Perhaps, she thought, that is what science truly is, the art of listening so deeply that the universe begins to sing back. She closed her eyes and let the quiet surround her, letting it cradle her thoughts, the way a mother hums a child to sleep. Somewhere above both worlds, the stars shimmered, ancient and kind, carrying the soft rhythm of the cosmos, the rhythm that has always been and always will be the lullaby of creation itself. Night after night, as Mars and Earth turned in their silent dance, something in humanity's relationship with the cosmos began to soften. What had started as a quest for proof had become something gentler, almost spiritual, a listening rather than a conquest. In laboratories and classrooms, in living rooms and observatories, people spoke of Mars not as a distant object, but as kin. The old ambition of discovery had transformed into something deeper reverence. And from that reverence came a dream, fragile yet luminous. A dream that both worlds, once so different, might share a common story written in dust, water, and time. It began as all dreams do, in silence. A silence not of absence, but of expectancy. the hush before a melody begins. For centuries, Mars had been a symbol of war and distance, its red glow mistaken for anger, its isolation for lifelessness. But now, as perseverance roamed its quiet valleys, humanity began to imagine something else entirely. What if Mars was not a barren exile, but an elder sibling, one who had lived, aged, and fallen asleep, leaving traces of wisdom behind for Earth to find? Dr. Elena Ruiz carried that thought with her everywhere. Even her dreams had changed. She often dreamed of standing at the edge of a Martian lake, its surface rippling beneath a pink sky. In those dreams, she felt not fear but familiarity, as though she were walking through a memory her soul already knew. When she awoke, the feeling lingered soft and undeniable. It was strange. She thought how science could guide one to awe, and awe could in turn deepen science. The dream of two worlds. Earth and Mars began to take root in human consciousness. Artists painted the planets not as separate, but as reflections, one blue and breathing, one red and sleeping. Poets wrote verses about cosmic kinship, about the ancient dust that connected all things. And for the scientists, even the most skeptical, there was comfort in that image. Because if life had touched both worlds, then life was not an accident. It was a rhythm that echoed through the universe, a song that never really ended. In a speech broadcast to schools across the world, Dr. Ruiz tried to capture this feeling. "We have always thought of Mars as the other," she said softly. "But perhaps it is not other at all. Perhaps Earth and Mars are twin notes in the same celestial chord, two hearts beating to the same cosmic rhythm, one still awake, the other in a long, beautiful sleep." Her words struck something deep in people. Children began to write letters addressed to Mars as if it were a person. One child wrote, "We are learning from your quietness. Thank you for waiting for us." Another wrote simply, "Sleep well. We're listening." Those letters were printed and sent to NASA, and Dr. Ruiz kept a few of them taped to her desk. Reminders that discovery is not only about evidence, it is about empathy. Meanwhile, Perseverance continued to trace its path along the ancient channels of Jezero Crater. Its instruments hummed softly in the thin Martian air, analyzing new samples and capturing the delicate textures of stones shaped by vanished rivers. In one photograph, the team saw two rocks leaning against each other, worn smooth by time, their shadows touching like old friends. Someone in the lab whispered, "It looks like Earth and Mars." The room went still, and for a moment, science and poetry became the same thing. As data kept streaming in, the idea of kinship deepened. Scientists noticed that many of the minerals forming on Mars, iron oxides, phosphates, clays, were not only similar to Earth's early building blocks, but arranged in patterns strikingly familiar. The same slow chemistry that had once awakened life on our planet seemed to have whispered its first lines on Mars too. It was as if the two worlds had once shared a dream, and then drifted apart, each carrying half the story. Dr. Ruiz began to call this idea the twin genesis hypothesis. In her papers, she wrote not with certainty, but with awe. Perhaps life did not begin in one place, but as a dialogue between two. Perhaps Earth and Mars were once partners in creation, exchanging the same cosmic breath across the young solar wind. Her colleagues read those words, and fell silent. Even in their skepticism, they felt something stir, a sense that the universe might be more intimate, more compassionate than they had ever dared to believe. The public embraced the notion with open hearts. For the first time, Mars wasn't a cold frontier. It was a home once lived in a chapter of existence that had simply ended earlier. Humanity began to look at its red neighbor with tenderness. The old dream of colonization gave way to something humbler: preservation. Plans for mining and domination softened into visions of restoration. "Let's not build on Mars," Dr. Ruiz said in an interview. "Let's listen to it. Let's make peace with it." Her words echoed far beyond the scientific community. Spiritual leaders, writers, and philosophers began to weave Mars into their reflections. They spoke of it as a teacher, a reminder that even lifeless worlds have lessons to give. On clear nights, when the red planet shone bright over cities, people looked up and felt smaller, but also more complete. The two worlds, separated by millions of miles, had become companions again, their silent connection spanning the vast space between them. One evening, after another long session at the lab, Dr. Ruiz returned home and found herself unable to sleep. She stepped outside where the sky was clear and cold. Mars hung low, glowing softly through a veil of mist. She whispered to it, not as a scientist, but as a friend. "We've read your story," she said, "and maybe it was ours all along." For a moment, she thought she could almost feel the planet listening. The air was still but alive with presence, the same kind of stillness she felt standing by a grave that wasn't sad, only full of memory. It struck her that perhaps the universe was not a collection of objects at all, but a communion of souls, some alive, some asleep, all connected by the same quiet longing to be known. In that realization, her heart softened further. She thought of all the work still ahead, the analyses, the arguments, the endless pursuit of clarity. But for once, she didn't feel the weight of it. Science and spirit were no longer two sides of a coin. They were the same breath drawn differently. Somewhere far away, Perseverance rested in the cooling night, its sensors dimming as the sun slipped below the horizon. Dust drifted over its wheels, covering the faint tracks it had made. Yet those tracks were not erasure, they were a message written across time. The two worlds had once shared a dream, and that dream had found its voice again through us. And as Mars turned slowly under its pale, starlit sky, it seemed to whisper through the silence, "We are still connected. We always were." The letters from children, the quiet poems written in honor of Mars, and the softened voices of scientists had transformed the mission into something more than exploration. Humanity was no longer just looking outward, it was looking inward into its own heart, reflected in the red dust of another world. The idea that Earth and Mars might share an ancient bond began to feel less like theory and more like truth. As Perseverance continued its long, patient work, one final act awaited, a message hidden within the stones themselves. A letter not written in ink or words, but in the language of atoms and time. When the signal arrived from Mars that morning, no one in the laboratory spoke at first. The message came as numbers, silent and dense, transmitted through millions of miles of emptiness. On the monitors, data lines began to glow, spectral readings, temperature patterns, chemical signatures, all converging into something strange, something that didn't belong to any previous scan. It was as if the planet had chosen that moment to whisper something new. Dr. Elena Ruiz leaned forward, her hands trembling slightly over the keyboard. The image formed slowly on the screen, a section of Martian mudstone taken from deep within an ancient delta. The colors were faint browns, reds, ochres, but the texture was unlike any they had seen before. There were lines curving and parallel, forming a pattern that seemed deliberate, almost tender, as though shaped by intention. It wasn't geometry that caught her breath. It was rhythm, the same kind of rhythm seen in stromatolites on Earth, layered sediments built by ancient microorganisms billions of years ago. Her team gathered around her. No one said a word. They all knew what this might mean. The analysis took hours. Instruments parsed through data, measuring isotopic ratios, examining traces of carbon and iron. Each result drew the same conclusion: this rock had formed in the presence of water and energy, under conditions that once allowed something to grow, to metabolize, to live. The evidence wasn't loud, but it was patient. It spoke the way truth always does, in whispers that deepen the longer one listens. As the data settled into certainty, Dr. Ruiz felt tears fill her eyes. Not of triumph, but of recognition. "It's not just a rock," she murmured. "It's a message." One of the younger scientists looked up, puzzled. "A message from whom?" "From time," she said softly. "From whatever came before us. It's their way of saying we were here too." The room remained still, the kind of stillness that follows revelation. The scientists had trained all their lives for this moment, but none of their equations had prepared them for how human it would feel. They weren't just uncovering data. They were reading a letter that had been waiting billions of years to be opened. As they decoded the findings, the results told a story simple in essence, but vast in implication. The structures inside the rock weren't random. They showed chemical gradients consistent with metabolic activity. Tiny changes in iron and sulfur pointed to ancient reactions that on Earth were known only to microbes that breathed minerals instead of air. The pattern was unmistakable, and the conclusion gentle but clear: Mars had once lived. News of the discovery spread quietly at first. NASA released a statement measured, precise, humble. Evidence consistent with ancient biological processes. The world read those words with reverence. For decades, humanity had asked the question. Now it had been answered not with spectacle, but with grace. But Dr. Ruiz knew the story wasn't finished. Proof alone was not the point. The stone, that quiet piece of eternity, had come, not just to confirm life's existence elsewhere, but to remind us what life truly was: a persistence of beauty in impossible places. Late one night after the announcement, Dr. Ruiz returned to the lab alone. The lights were dim, and the only sound was the faint hum of cooling fans. She walked to the monitor where the image of the rock still glowed softly. She zoomed in, tracing the delicate ripples one more time. They looked like fingerprints pressed into the planet's skin, or perhaps like writing. "If you could speak," she whispered to the screen, "what would you say?" And in the silence that followed, she imagined the answer not in words, but in feeling, a presence warm and patient, as if the universe itself were leaning close to remind her of something ancient and kind. In her mind, she heard it clearly. Life is not rare, Elena. It is the universe learning to love itself. The thought shook her. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in her life, she prayed not to a deity, but to existence itself. Gratitude, wonder, humility. They all merged into something she couldn't name. Perhaps that was the truest form of prayer, not asking, not thanking, but simply listening. Over the following days, the discovery spread across the world. Cities held vigils not in mourning, but in awe. People gathered under night skies to look at Mars, whispering words of welcome. Churches, temples, and schools all joined in quiet reflection. The discovery had not divided science and faith, it had joined them. For the first time, humanity stood together under one truth: that life was not a miracle bound to one world, but the natural consequence of creation itself. In classrooms, children wrote messages to Mars again. This time the words were simpler, softer. "Thank you for waiting." One read, "We found your letter." And somewhere in the red stillness of Jezero crater, Perseverance stood silent, its body coated with fine dust, its instruments powered down for the night. The rock samples inside it waited too, sealed and safe, like the pages of a sacred book awaiting the hands that would one day turn them. The planet, quiet and content, seemed to exhale. Dr. Ruiz watched the last image transmitted before the rover entered standby, a panorama of the crater at dusk. The light was golden, almost Earth-like. She smiled faintly. "So this is how you say goodnight," she murmured. As the screen dimmed, she felt peace. Not because she had found all the answers, but because she no longer needed them. The universe was not a riddle to solve, but a letter to be read slowly with care. And now, with this small stone from a faraway shore, humanity had begun to understand the handwriting. Outside, Mars glowed faintly through the atmosphere, steady and patient as it had for eons. Its silence no longer felt empty. It felt alive, alive with memory, with meaning, with love, written in dust and light. And for the first time, humanity understood that across space and time, every world is both writer and reader, each sending and receiving the same message in its own quiet way. We were here. We still are. The world did not erupt in celebration after the discovery. It didn't need to. Instead, something quieter and far more beautiful happened. Humanity grew still. Across cities and continents, people looked toward the night sky and saw Mars no longer as a mystery to conquer, but as a companion, an ancient soul that had waited billions of years for someone to understand its silence. The rock they had studied, that humble fragment of mudstone, had become more than evidence. It had become a mirror reflecting what it meant to be alive. And as the excitement softened into reflection, a new awareness began to rise, an awareness that life's greatest miracle had never been its rarity, but its resilience. It was dawn at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. The desert outside was still gray with early light, and the quiet hum of the computers filled the hallways like the steady breathing of a sleeping world. Dr. Elena Ruiz stood alone in the observation room, watching the last data transmission from Perseverance flicker across the monitor. The rover had sent one final panoramic image before entering hibernation mode, an image of the Jezero crater bathed in soft golden light. The landscape looked peaceful, timeless, untouched. It felt less like an ending and more like a sigh. She rested her hand against the glass, her eyes tracing the lines of the Martian horizon. For months now, She had been the voice behind the mission's updates, the one translating numbers into meaning, facts into stories. Yet in this final image, she sensed something words could never contain. It wasn't just the picture of another world, it was the reflection of our own. Mars, she thought, wasn't teaching us how to find life. It was teaching us how to see life everywhere, in everything, even in silence. When the confirmation came that perseverance had powered down, the room remained still. No applause, no cheering, only a soft murmur of gratitude, like a prayer spoken under one's breath. Around her, the team members sat quietly at their stations, eyes damp, faces calm. They had reached the edge of discovery, and beyond it, a kind of peace. The following weeks passed slowly, as if time itself had decided to take a breath. The world continued to turn, but its rhythm felt gentler. Across continents, people spoke of Mars as if it were a friend they had just met. A quiet friend, patient and wise. In schools, children learned not only the science of the discovery, but the poetry of it. Teachers spoke of ancient rivers that had once flowed on Mars, and asked their students to imagine what it would have sounded like: the hush of water meeting rock, the whisper of wind carrying dust across an alien sky. For many, that act of imagining was more powerful than the proof itself. It made them feel connected to Mars, to Earth, to the vastness that surrounded them. The universe, once feared for its emptiness, now felt full of memory, full of possibility. Humanity had looked into the silence and discovered it was not alone. Dr. Ruiz traveled often during that time, giving talks, meeting students, sharing her story. Yet what moved her most were not the scientific questions, but the emotional ones. "Do you think they were like us?" a child asked her once. "Did they love too?" She smiled and answered honestly, "Maybe not the way we do, but love isn't only for hearts. It's for atoms, for gravity, for everything that reaches out and holds something close." In that way, yes, they loved. Her words spread further than she expected. In a world long divided by noise and competition, the idea that the universe itself was built on connection, not isolation, struck a deep chord. People began to see their own planet differently. News outlets that once spoke of conquest now spoke of care. Artists painted the red planet wrapped in the blue embrace of Earth. Musicians composed songs that blended the sounds of wind, heartbeat, and silence, music that felt like breathing between stars. And in the scientific community, something subtle but profound began to shift. The language of discovery softened. Researchers spoke less of colonization and more of communion. Exploration was no longer about escape, but a return to humility, to wonder, to the shared story of creation written across worlds. Back in her home office, Dr. Ruiz kept a small stone on her desk, not Martian, but from a dried riverbed near her childhood home. It reminded her that the difference between her world and Mars's was not as vast as it seemed. Both had known water. Both had known time. Both had carried life in some form, even if one carried it in memory. Some nights, she would hold the stone in her palm and imagine the dust of Mars beneath her fingers. "We're not so different," she would whisper, as though speaking to an old friend. One evening, as she watched the sun set over the California desert, she thought of Perseverance resting beneath the Martian sky. The rover's batteries would one day go cold, its body covered in layers of red dust. But that didn't feel like loss. It felt like belonging. Percy was not gone, it had simply become part of the world it had loved so patiently. The thought comforted her deeply. That night, she dreamed again. She was standing in the Jezero crater, the air thin but soft. Around her the ground shimmered faintly, as if the dust remembered sunlight. And then she heard it, a faint rhythm, not quite music, not quite wind. It was the heartbeat of the planet, slow and vast. When she placed her hand on the ground, she felt warmth rising through it. The warmth was not just Mars, it was Earth, the sun, every star that had ever lived. The universe breathing through her. When she awoke, tears stained her face, but she was smiling. For the first time in her life, she understood what Mars had truly taught them, not how to find life, but how to recognize it. Life was not limited to cells or organs or motion. Life was presence, persistence, pattern, the quiet continuation of meaning across time. Even the silence between stars was alive with it. That morning, as she prepared her final report, she wrote one last note in her journal. We feared the silence for so long, thinking it meant we were alone. But now I know silence is just life in another language. And the universe has been speaking to us all along. When the report was published, it ended with a simple line that would echo through generations. Mars has given us back our wonder. Years later, people would still speak of that moment. The moment when humanity looked into the void and saw not emptiness, but reflection. Mars had not answered the question of whether we are alone. It had transformed the question itself. Because now it no longer mattered whether life existed elsewhere. What mattered was that existence itself had always been alive. And somewhere in the quiet expanse of Jezero crater, a thin layer of dust settled over the body of a rover that once listened to the wind. The red planet slept peacefully, knowing its story had been heard at last. The silence that followed was not the end. It was a benediction. The stars above shimmered faintly as if to say, "Rest now." They finally understand.